Rafael Nadal is a true tennis legend, and today I'm going to reveal the #1 strategy that you should steal from him to win more matches fast. It has nothing to do with crushing winners, hitting tons of topspin, or being left-handed. Instead, it's a fundamental tennis principle that works at all levels for all players. Here are the 3 simple steps. Identify your strength, identify opponent weaknesses, and create an SDP. I'll tell you what that is and get to the Nadal point examples in just a minute. First, let's set the stage with the first 2 steps. A lot of tennis players get completely off track right from the beginning of this process because they assume their top strength should be a big, powerful weapon that they can crush close to the lines. Sometimes that's true, but for most of us regular, everyday players, it will not be the case. Take me, for example. As a 4.5 player, I can hit my forehand hard, and I like to hit it hard, but some days it gets me into a lot of trouble if I happen to be spraying it. My backhand, on the other hand, doesn't look like anything special because I almost always slice it, but I also very rarely miss it. So sometimes my backhand slice can absolutely be a bigger strength than my forehand. Your top strength could be consistency or court coverage, changing heights and depths of shot, hitting with power or with lots of spin, or even mental tenacity and resilience. Spend some time reflecting on this and ideally watch yourself play on video to get a more objective look at how you're winning and losing points. If you don't get a lot of clarity on this step, you're always going to struggle winning at tennis consistently. As you work on developing your simple, deadly plans so you can win more matches, make sure to head over to tennissecret.com, where I'll show you where to aim and where to stand to make the game of tennis dramatically easier for you and dramatically harder for your opponents. Specifically, in your very next match, I'll show you how to do half the amount of running and make half the errors just by making some simple adjustments to where you stand on the court and where you aim on the court. Pair that with your simple, deadly plan, and you'll be winning tons of matches super quickly. This is totally free, so make sure to go to tennissecret.com and pick up the training. Step number 2 is to pick out your opponent's biggest weaknesses as quickly as possible, ideally during the warm-up. And here's some ideas on how you can do that, practically speaking. Number 1, watch for shots that they try to avoid hitting, especially during the warm-up, but also the first couple of service games of the match. So specifically, look for them running around a backhand to hit forehands instead. Watch for them maybe letting the ball bounce up super high out of their strike zone or allowing it to drop super low in their strike zone where they're not very good at hitting the ball in a comfortable spot. That's a good indicator that you can change up heights and make them super uncomfortable. Watch for them maybe slicing everything on one side or the other instead of ever hitting topspin. And watch for them totally skipping warming shots up, like the overhead. A lot of times players will just not take any overheads, which is a pretty good sign that they probably don't like it much or they don't plan on coming into the net, which you can use that information later on. Okay, number 2, watch for jerky, awkward swing techniques. This is not always a guarantee of a weakness, but oftentimes it does lead to some kind of weakness, whether that be mistakes or weak shots that you can attack or something like that. And thirdly, purposefully change heights and depths and widths of your shot early on, even in the warm-up. Now, note on this, keep it respectful and reasonable. We don't want to act like we're trying to win the warm-up and like just slap, winners side to side. But while you do that, kind of poke and prod a little bit and test things out and look for opportunities once the match gets started. Step number 3 is create an SDP, simple, deadly plan. And we're going to look at what Rafa's is in just a second. Let's spell out what each of these different steps are for him. Number 1, he's a lefty. He hits with huge topspin, and he can absolutely crush his forehand. So that's his strength. Step number 2, weakness. Most of his opponents are right-handed with better forehands and worse backhands. Even somebody like the great Roger Federer, he had this setup against Roger. So number 3, simple deadly plan. The more cross-court forehands that Rafa can hit to their weaker backhands, the better. Let's look at some practical real-world examples of this in action. This point is from the 2017 Australian Open final where Nadal played against Federer. And I want you to watch how in just the second point of the match, Nadal is going to establish this simple, deadly plan by taking a backhand initially and hitting a high, heavy backhand across to Roger's backhand. And when Roger hits this down the middle, watch how Nadal moves around this shot to hit a forehand. It would be very easy to assume that with this set up the way it is, Rafa's got some open court, cross court, and he's got a really nice angle here to hit his forehand across at a really favorable direction. But instead of going for the higher percentage direction and hitting to the open courts, watch how Rafa instead hits the ball down the line and goes right back to Roger's backhand again. And you can see Roger was actually kind of half expecting the ball to go cross court, but instead he has to catch his momentum and go back the other way again. And so Rafa is just out of the gate setting up this expectation that, buddy, you're going to have to hit a whole mess of backhands right now. When Roger plays defense on this and hits back to the middle again and Roger moves forwards, again, it'd be easy to assume that, okay, well, this is the time to pull the trigger, right? And go the other direction. Let's do something a little bit different. We've already hit to this corner twice in a row, but Rafa doesn't care about that. He's just going to go ahead and go back to the baseline again to Roger's backhand side. He thinks briefly about coming into the net, but decides not to and goes back again. Roger's just purely on the defensive. And now here we've got open court again. And again, a ball that Rafa could easily take cross court to the opposite corner, but he goes back to the backhand again. And if you've watched a lot of Rafa playing, then this is not surprising to you. Now, this is the first ball that really kind of makes sense to go cross court. He's being stretched out, finally challenged a little bit out into his forehand corner. And so with this kind of wider outside forehand, now it just makes sense to go cross court. And of course he does. A lot of players watching at home, and myself included, I fall into this trap, will take this type of ball and slap it down the line because it's oh, look, well, I've got a little bit extra space here because Roger's, offset a little bit on that side. I already hit Roger 3. If I go back to his backhand, I'm getting pretty predictable at this point. I better mix it up, and I've got pretty good balance here. Let's just go ahead and go for the shot down the line. Rafa doesn't care about any of that. He's just leaning on what he knows is the weaker side. And shot after shot, he's forcing Roger to have to deal with this heavy topspin up high to one-handed backhand. Rafa finally has to hit a backhand, and now he goes cross-court just to stick with the pattern. And now Roger gets a little bit of a break here as they exchange a couple cross-court shots on the deuce side. But as soon as Roger hits a ball back towards the middle, what's going to happen? Rafa's just going to go right back to the well again and punish Roger and force him to have to try to hit another backhand. This is so deceptively simple. Well, duh. Okay, Rafa's got a good forehand. His opponent has a weaker backhand. Just hit that again and again and again. And it's so simple that I think a lot of players pass it up and they're okay, yeah, makes sense. But then when they go and play, they're going corner to corner to corner to corner. And you have to understand, you take on extra risk when you do that. Instead of doing something more simple that just stacks a strength to a weakness and then rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. To be really, really clear, Rafa uses lots of different patterns, lots of different strategies. I'm not trying to say the only direction he ever hits is a cross-court forehand, but this is definitely his bread and butter, kind of his core pattern. And all you need is one of these core patterns to win a tennis match at our everyday level. So I hope you just take this to heart and don't be fooled by the simplicity. This idea is incredibly powerful. Let's look at another example here. This time Rafa's serving. And so of course on the ad side, he's going to serve into the backhand, probably going for the body here. Roger ends up just slicing it back. Rafa gets a forehand. Of course, he's got 50-50 proposition here. He could either hit this shot in this direction or this direction. And in general, when he's got a 50-50 opportunity as far as making his opponent move in either direction, is he going to go to their stronger shot or their weaker shot? I know on paper this sounds like duh, like so obvious. But listen, when I evaluate point play with my students, 3-0, 3-5, 4-0, 4-5 students, players are just not doing this. Players are thinking, I need to be more sneaky, I need to be more cunning, I can't be so predictable. And you need to throw those ideas out and just stick with one simple thing that just works until it doesn't work anymore. So Roger gets stretched out here, hits a slice, and now Rafa gets a short forehand. Now, everybody who commentates on tennis on TV always says, oh, they got to approach like down the line. And there's good reason for that. There's very good geometric reason for that. And so like the rule of thumb, as per geometry and as per like good patterns, like good like textbook patterns in tennis, would be to take this down the line. But why risk giving Roger Federer, one of the greatest forehands of all time, a forehand, even though geometrically it makes sense, and also even though there's more open court in this direction than there is in this direction? Rafa is about to completely ignore all that. Completely ignore. I promise you he understands the geometry of approaching the net. And I promise you he's aware that there's more available court down the line than there is cross court. But he goes cross court anyway. Even though it's more work for him, he's got to move so far here to get into the right direction. Into the right position. But he knows that it's worth the trade-off to make Federer hit a backhand instead of a forehand. So he leaves himself vulnerable here, just to be really clear. This is the down-the-line pass is available to Roger because of the direction that Rafa takes this approach shot. But Rafa anticipates, shifts his direction, his momentum in that direction, and is there for the passing shot. And so again, just an example of ignoring kind of the textbook and just sticking with the simple deadly plan. Just to be really, really clear, I am not saying to copy Nadal's simple deadly plan. Unless you're also left-handed and you happen to hit great time, like if you have his attributes, then go ahead and copy his plan. I, in this video, am just trying to lay out the principle of the simple deadly plan, the process of figuring out what it should be match by match by match, and hopefully the application and kind of the mindset and the tenacity of just sticking with it the way that Rafa did so incredibly well. He was so disciplined about just sticking with what works and never deviating unless he absolutely had to. So put that into play, and I promise you'll win more matches. And if you want to learn how to be more effective with your targets and your positioning, make sure to go to tennissecret.com and pick up that free training as well. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you in the next video.